Today, I want to talk about how the GMAT works in 2025. Let's make sure you understand all the important steps, policies, and best practices to perform well, avoid pitfalls, and get this done as quickly as possible. We're going to talk a lot about basics today, like what exactly the exam covers, how the scoring algorithm works, and a lot of things that are easy to overlook that can be really hurtful if you're not aware of them. For example, if you don't hit the confirm button on the final question at the end of every section, even if the correct option is bubbled, the question will be marked as blank and you'll receive a major penalty that could be up to 30 points removed from your overall score. And that's just one question out of one of the three sections. If you did that in all three questions, it could be much more than that. So it seems like a small thing, but obviously it has huge impacts. So we're going to cover those kinds of things in today's episode. Ask yourself, if you were playing one of the most important games of your life, would you want to make sure that you know all the rules? I would. That's what I've done my best to compile for you here. I've realized that a shocking number of people end up losing valuable points and valuable time, maybe more importantly, as a result of not knowing this stuff. So this should help regardless of whether you're just starting out or have been studying for some time. Let's go. Number one, what is the GMAT? The GMAT, or an equivalent test, more on that later, is required for entry to most MBA programs. Many of us would prefer to skip it, and while that is an option at some programs, it is not an option at many. If you're not sure if the GMAT is required at your target MBA program, a bit of research on each program's website should really help you know whether you need to take the exam or not. That alone might have just saved you months, maybe years of time and energy. In fact, if you're really concerned about the exam, you can specifically look up test optional schools. That's what they call it, test optional. And if that type of school would work for your goals, then I probably just saved you even more time. You can now even just stop listening to this episode and stop studying and move on with your life. Having said that, if you want a super top brand school, then you will most likely need to figure out a way to perform well on the GMAT. So why does the GMAT matter? There probably isn't much you can do to change your undergraduate GPA, and there probably isn't much you can do to change your past work experience. Changing your current and future work experience can sometimes happen quickly, such as getting recognized or getting a promotion, but that can also take quite a bit of time and is not always 100% within our control. Having said that, in a relatively short amount of time, you can drastically improve your GMAT score, which is about 1/3 of a school's decision of whether to admit you or not. Give or take, there are other factors, and different schools weight the GMAT differently, but roughly 1/3 is a good estimate. The other two factors are undergraduate GPA and what we will call your story, which is basically your past, present, and future of what you've already done with your career, what you're doing now with your career, and what you want to do with your career. We would wrap all of that up with how well that fits with what the school offers. That's what we're going to call your story. If you have a lower GPA, the GMAT is a huge blessing. Again, it's going to be pretty tough to go back in time and change your undergraduate GPA, but you can do a lot to change your GMAT score. The same is true if your work experience is just okay. If you're strong in those areas, that's fantastic. You may not need to invest as much time and energy in the GMAT, which hopefully means I just saved you a lot of time as well. But if your work experience is just okay or your undergraduate GPA is not that great, then the GMAT is your best friend. It basically allows you to totally make up for that, or at least partially make up for that. So because the GMAT is valuable for many of us, that naturally leads us to the question of how do I do well on the exam? This is both a simple and a complicated topic. The simple part is do the right thing at the right time in the right way. And most, if not all, of our episodes and content is aimed at helping you do that as much as we possibly can. The potentially more complicated answer is that it's really different for different people. Like the best way to do well on the GMAT can vary from person to person quite a bit. So the good news is that we've put together a couple episodes that are going to be great next steps. And when we're done here, And as I go through the episode, I'm going to talk you through those, and that will help you figure out exactly what you personally need to do given your unique circumstances and goals. Now, if you don't already have a paid provider, if you haven't yet made that decision, then I'm going to recommend you check out our How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2025 episode, which will be linked in the description of this content. If you already have a provider or you're committed to doing this for free, for example, then I would strongly recommend the How to Structure Your GMAT Focused Study Time episode, which also should be linked below. If you're struggling with specific areas, whether you have a provider or not, then I would recommend our specific quant, specific verbal, and or specific DI episodes, depending on what you are struggling with. And then we can branch off from there to help you make good decisions about your personal situation and for you personally, what is the right thing at the right time in the right way. That's what those 5 episodes that I just walked you through are going to help you kickstart. So no matter where you are in the process, if you follow the advice that I give there, you should know how to do well. You should have the basic steps in place. And if you have a paid provider helping you out, there's going to be a lot of support there as well. At that point, once you know what you should be doing, the only things that can hold you back are going to be execution problems. So if you struggle with execution, I'm going to recommend you check out our discipline and consistency episodes, which are going to be linked below as well. Discipline and consistency, they're 2 different episodes. They should help tremendously if you struggle with execution. If you overwork yourself and execution is not the problem, but stopping and giving yourself some rest so you don't burn yourself out, then I'm going to highly recommend our How to Stay Balanced While Studying for the GMAT episode. And that's basically how you do well on the GMAT. I know I kind of gave this sort of simple answer, right thing at the right time in the right way. But because it's such a deep topic and there's just so much variance from person to person, those episodes should be a great way for you to figure out your specific custom game plan if you do want to do that on your own. And if you want some help with that, I'll talk to you about how you can get that help a little bit later. So that's how you do well on the GMAT. Let's get deeper into some of the nitty-gritty rules I was talking about at the top of the episode. So what is the basic format of the exam? 21 quantitative questions in 45 minutes, that's your quant section. 23 verbal questions in 45 minutes, that's your verbal section. And 20 data questions in 45 minutes, that's your data section. Those are the 3 sections of the GMAT. So 3 45-minute sections, 1 quant, 1 verbal, 1 data, and 1 optional 10-minute break. Now, many of you are already familiar with the basics there, but just in case, I want to run through that. Now, the next thing that you may not have thought about or may not be fully aware of yet is that you can take the test in any order. For example, you can take quant first, then you can take the verbal section, and then you can take the data section with no break in between any of them if you wanted to do that. Or you can take the verbal section first, then take the optional 10-minute break, and then take the data, and then take the quant section at the end. And any arrangement of a single break and those 3 sections is allowed. So when you start the exam, there's many, many different combinations of order that you could use. Now, partly because of that, I'm often asked if there's a recommended order, and the short answer is no. GMAC, the people who write the GMAT, did a very large study that demonstrated that section order basically does not influence overall score in any meaningful way. Some people have theories about whether section order matters, but I personally have not found that to be the case other than purely psychological factors, such as I just feel better getting quant out of the way at the start of the exam. So my advice, which is very simple and very straightforward by design, is to experiment if you're genuinely unsure and pick the section order that just feels best to you emotionally and psychologically. That's my recommendation. And I recommend tuning out all other advice about section order, okay? None of that advice is validated by GMAC, just for the record. I recommend instead that you focus the energy you would have focused on any potentially quote unquote magical section order on factors that are going to have a much more meaningful impact on your score, such as time management, content knowledge, and skill building with specific problem types you struggle with. That's my advice. If you want to take someone else's advice, that is completely your decision. So that's the basic format of the GMAT and how to deal with the whole section order situation. So when can I take the GMAT? The GMAT is actually available all year round, in person and online. There's actually, as of today, which is February of 2025, a bit of a scheduling problem with online exams. We're all very hopeful that the tech issue behind that is going to be resolved soon, but right now it's in the US at least, it's a little bit difficult to book an online exam. Hopefully that's already resolved by the time you hear this. It looks like the earliest dates available online in the US are July, but again, that could change any day as soon as the tech issue is resolved. So let's just say, for all intents and purposes, you can take it in person and online almost any day of the year. Now, you will want to check with your specific test center's availability because not every test center is open every day, and some major holidays, are observed depending on your location. So, depending on what country you're in or what city you're in, even potentially, there can be different hours and different availability of in-person test centers. And then even online, like I just talked about, every once in a while, there are some days that are not available. But barring those few exceptions, you can take the GMAT almost every day of the year. And a lot of people don't know that, even if they've been studying for a while. So I think the natural next question there is, when should I sign up? And the simple version is about 6 weeks before you think you'll be ready to take an official exam and receive a score that you're happy with. So if you're feeling confident, you feel like your skills are there, you've got some data to validate on your practice test, then about 6 weeks is usually a good timeline to schedule. In-person availability tends to fill up around the deadlines. Major round one deadlines are usually September, October-ish. Major round two deadlines are usually January-ish. And then if your school has a round three, or you're thinking of taking the exam around the springtime, usually March, April are those round three deadlines. So especially if you want weekend availability during those times of the year, you might want to try to book out 8 to 12 weeks in advance. 6 weeks is usually safe, but not always, especially again at those kind of like busy times of the year. Now, it's worth mentioning that some people are more motivated by scheduling a specific test date and just like having a stake in the sand, if that makes sense. And if that's you, by all means, go for it. Whatever it takes to bring out your best. Pick something you think is realistic and then use that extra energy to channel into your studies and perform your best. If you're wondering how long this process is going to take, then you can go back to that How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2025 episode, and I actually break down every single path that you could take with an average hour per point gain attached to each one. And I think you'll find that really, really helpful if you want to estimate how long this is going to take. I do want to be clear, those are just averages. That's not a guarantee, but it's an extremely large data set, and the data is really, really interesting on that. Now, the flip side of that is many of you might be stressed to an unhelpful degree by looking at a test date like that, or just like booking something and putting a stake in the sand. So it's totally okay to wait until you see your goal score on a practice exam as well. So that's kind of the simple answer to when should I book. There are more complex answers, and I actually address all of those in extreme depth in an episode called When Am I Ready to Take the GMAT? And that'll be linked in the description as well. So if you want a really, really detailed guide on when to take the exam and what your odds of success are in different situations, that's there for you. If you don't, you can stick with my simple advice I just gave you. Let's talk about a few other basics. How do I get practice exams? The best first step in any high-quality GMAT study plan is to take a cold baseline exam from MBA.com. The official MBA.com practice exams are the highest quality. They use the real scoring algorithm that the actual official test will use, and it is the best gauge of where your skill set and where your score is currently. The reason it's so important to take that initial baseline, even if it's totally cold and you haven't studied at all, is if you don't know where you're starting, it is truly impossible to optimize your journey. And this is something that you've heard me say a lot if you have been listening for some time, which is, what's the fastest way to New York City from an unknown starting destination? It's an impossible question to answer. So the most important and highest quality exams, like I said, are from MBA.com. This is a question I get asked a lot. I already discussed those a bit in the what everyone should know about the GMAT in 2025 episode, and I'm doing my best not to have any or any unhelpful overlap between that episode and this one. So please check that out if you want a little bit more detail about some of the ways the exam has changed over the past years and how that's going to affect the materials that you use. But I'm not going to address that here, just in case you've already listened to that and taken action on it. But that's there for you if you do want to get a little bit better read on materials and how they're changing as time goes on. What I did not discuss in that episode, though, is the logistics of getting access to the test and setting them up. So I actually am going to go through that a little bit here. Again, this is like studying the rules of the game of this very important game that you're playing in your life right now with this process. And on MBA.com, there's something called the official starter kit that contains 2 free practice exams. And I think that is somewhat intuitively named, but not everybody looks at that and thinks like, oh yeah, those are going to be the practice exams. So I just think it's helpful to discuss. You will give MBA.com your email address in exchange for those free exams. The first 2 are free, and then you'll be guided to where to take the test. Now, as of today, I think it is worth mentioning, even if you feel like I'm going deep in the weeds here, I promise this will help. The process of locating the exams is a bit complicated even after you have registered the product. So once you find them, I highly recommend bookmarking that URL in your browser. If you're not sure how to bookmark a URL, just web search it. This is going to save you potentially hours of searching for these things as time goes on in your studies. It can be a real pain to recall the I don't remember the last time I counted, but I think it's like 7 or 8 steps or clicks that need to be made to get from the MBA.com homepage to the actual practice test itself, which I think a lot of people find a little bit unexpected. And I actually see people posting regularly online like, hey, how do I find these things? And you have like experts replying with this like multi-step process. So let's see if we can get that out of the way with a bookmark. If that gets updated, I'll let you know. But as of now, that's what I recommend. Just bookmark the page. And I honestly, I have had people searching for a practice test 15 minutes or 20 minutes before they're able to take the test. And it can be a little bit of a waste of time, in my opinion. So that's that. Again, it seems like a small thing, but with many of my clients, I've seen that add up to like maybe an hour of searching for tests over the course of a 3 or 6 month study timeline, which is just kind of crazy if you think about it. Very avoidable. What other materials should you use? This is heavily dependent on your starting score, your goal score, your timeline, and your budget. If you want a full breakdown about how to make a good decision based on all of those factors, the How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2025 episode is going to be the place to go for that. If you already have your materials and you've already done that math, then let's just proceed. But the short answer to what materials should you use is just listen to that episode and make a decision if you're not sure. Because there is a truly overwhelming amount of stuff that you can do and engage with as a GMAT studier, whether you're going the paid route or free route. And I've found that people tend to amass materials to a potentially unhelpful degree sometimes, and it ends up being a little bit of a distraction instead of what most of us want to be doing, which is focusing on the stuff that's going to get us done with this thing as fast as possible. And that's a huge reason why I'm spending this time making this for you right now. So feel free to reach out to us if you're really not sure about what materials are right for your situation after you've listened to that How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2025 episode. You can DM us anytime at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels, or you can email us contact, CONTACT, at thegmatstrategy.com is our public contact address. Next up, how do I get extended time? If you've had extended time in the past due to learning differences, then you should web search GMAT accommodations. That's what it's called officially, and go from there. The process is fairly straightforward. It's a step-by-step thing they walk you through on the website. The basics are that you'll provide documentation for your learning differences and then write a short essay explaining the situation. Then you'll wait to hear back from GMAC. Timelines are anywhere from a few days all the way up to maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And if you've had that documented in the past, there's a high likelihood that you'll be able to receive it. And in my personal opinion, you deserve it. That's why the accommodations are there, is to level the playing field for people who are just wired a little bit differently. If you have questions about that, you can feel free to touch base with us there, but most of that stuff is pretty self-explanatory with a little bit of web searching. Having said that, if you do get stuck, we are here for you. So with those rules covered, what is your first step? Like I mentioned, take a cold baseline from MBA.com so you can figure out where you're starting. That is the first step for everybody on this path. Now, many of you will have already done that. So what is your next step? After you've gotten your baseline exam, you want to establish some targets for each section. You want to establish a goal score within quant, a goal score within verbal, and a goal score within DI. It doesn't need to be perfect. I'm going to talk you through the math of how you can do that real quick, but you do want to have something so that you can start to optimize your time and start to figure out how much time should you be spending on quant, how much time should you be spending on verbal, both on a daily basis and across the course of your studies, because that's going to really help you pick the right provider for you if you haven't picked a provider already. Or if you need to switch, hopefully that's not the case, but it does happen somewhat frequently. We have an episode on how to switch if that's the situation that you're in and you're struggling with your current provider. But if you do need to switch, knowing those targets and the kind of gap you need to cover within verbal, quant, and DI will help you pick a program that's optimized for quant or optimized for DI or et cetera. So simple process here to figure out what your target scores should be. Web search your desired programs and find out their class stats for the GMAT. You can set your targets accordingly and based on the strength of the other areas of your application I mentioned. So for example, if you have a lower GPA, you might want to set your 3-digit GMAT score, like the 555, 655, 805 type scores you've seen, which usually will be on the website. They usually won't publish the individual quant, verbal, and DI scores for the entering class, but they'll publish the 3-digit score. And they'll publish usually their average and or their median. And if your GPA is a little low, you might want to shoot above the average for your target score. If your GPA is on the higher side, you might be able to get away with a slightly lower GMAT if time is of the essence for you. For a lot of people, let's say the middle 80% of all of us, it's just going to be the average itself will be a good target to begin with. And you can adjust that up or down depending on how much energy you want to devote to this. Okay. So in terms of sub-score targets, quant, verbal, and DI, I think the simplest framework is your first goal should be score at least 78 in each of those sections. And I'm not talking about percentiles here. I'm talking about the actual score itself. The percentiles are a little deflated in quant, a little inflated in verbal, and a little bit hard to read in DI. And that's just because the data set is from the worldwide population. It's not localized. And so with those percentiles, you've got the quant percentile being driven down over the years and the verbal percentile being driven up over the years. It's not really important why that happens. It's just important to know that you want to focus on the sub-scores themselves. And that's what I want to teach you here right now, because a score on a scale of 0 to 90 is totally meaningless for most of us. It's like 78. Is that good? I don't know. And then we look at the percentile, and that's kind of the more familiar way that we judge our score. But I have found the percentiles to be a little bit counterproductive for people. So I think the scores itself are going to give you a little bit firmer grasp on what needs work and when. So after you get 78 in each section, you can figure out which section you think you can improve the fastest and go from there. But that first initial baseline test, if you don't get 78 in each section, which is common, by the way, that should be your initial goal. So if you start 74 in quant, 80 in verbal, 76 in DI, you're going to want a strong quant program. If you're starting with 80 in quant and 74 in verbal and 72 in DI, then you're going to want a really strong verbal and DI program, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's the first target is 78 in each section. Now, if your initial practice test is 80, 80, 80 in all of them, then you have surpassed that initial baseline. And then what you can do is you can start to think about which score you think you can improve the fastest and go from there. Because after that 78 target across the board, the individual scores are a little bit less important to business schools, and the overall 3-digit score becomes more important. And they will look at both. So you do want to meet the minimum. But after you've met those minimums, like raising your quant score 5 points versus raising your verbal score 5 points is not as meaningful as it might seem, if that makes sense. It's more about moving the 3-digit score. So let's talk about how to do that, because it's not super intuitive. You'll want to remember this. Usually you'll gain about 10 points on the overall 3-digit score for each 1.5 sub-score point improvement in an individual section like quant. So it's not possible to go from 78 to 79.5 because they're not scored in half-point increments. But if it was possible to do that in quant, then that would lift my overall score from like a 555 to a 565, if that makes sense. Just trying to help you understand the math. These are some rough numbers because it does change across the score scale, but I've found this to be a good way to estimate. So let's pick a number that's actually gettable as far as a sub-score goes. So if you want a 20-point gain, you're going to need 3 more sub-score points in most situations to make that happen, okay? So that could be going from 78 to 81 in quant, or it could be going from 78 to 81 in verbal, or it could be going from 81 to 84 in verbal, or it could be going from 78 to 79 in all 3 sections. Either way, you're getting 3 more sub-score points, and that's going to lift the overall score about 20 points, give or take. Again, there's going to be some variance here. There are score calculators you can use out there online if you want to exact read, but this will be a good estimator for you as you're getting going. Or if you've been studying for a while and you're like, oh, that's how the scoring works, then that should help out. So just quick rule of thumb for calculating the total score you'll need based on the individual scores that you get. Now, again, just to drive this point home, those 3 points, if we're looking for a 20-point gain, those 3 subscore points can come from anywhere that you think is the most efficient. So if you think it's going to be easier to go from 78 to 81 in DI than it is to go from 78 to 80 in quant and then 80 to 81 in verbal, for example, then I recommend you double down on DI and you try to work that strength, if that makes sense. If you want the fastest results. Obviously, if you want this to take a long time, you don't have to optimize any of this and you can just brute force it. So that's that. Focus on 78 in each section first. Once you've reached those targets, find the section that you think you can improve the most and do the math on how many subscore points you need to hit your overall 3-digit target. And that should get you a good initial baseline target score to help you optimize going forward. Now, again, if you have questions about this or you're confused, feel free to reach out to us. Again, at the GMAT strategy, you can DM us or contact at thegmatstrategy.com if you prefer email. Now, even with all of that being said, if you're super, super lost or just totally unsure of what the next step is for you personally, and the general advice is just like not working for you anymore, if that makes sense, and you've been stuck for a while, like I was when I was studying, or you're not seeing the kind of progress that you want to see with your current plan or the kind of speed you want to see, we do offer a free service to help you with that. We will get on a call with you and assess your situation and set you up with a study plan that is designed for you personally. We will sketch out a few paid products in the market that might help you, but we don't have any referral partnerships at the moment. So it's a totally unbiased set of recommendations. In fact, many of these people are actively trying to like hurt our brand at TGS and discredit us publicly. And I will still recommend their product if I think it is the right fit for you. That is, if you have a call with me, but any of my team will do the same thing. If we think free options are the best for you, then we'll just recommend those instead of paid options. If we think some paid options are going to be good for you, we'll recommend those. But that's pretty much how that works. And I think it's pretty cool. I could have used that really, really badly when I was back in your position many years ago when I was first studying for this thing. And if you want to know more about my story, you can go to the website and hear some of the pain and suffering that I went through. Now, if you're interested in working directly with us, we do have paid products. You can ask about that on the call if you want to, but we don't automatically include our products in any of our recommendations. They're just there if you want more options, okay? There's no obligation for the call. There's no catch. I don't believe in doing that kind of thing in business personally. But I also realize that there are a lot of reasons to be cynical these days, and there are a lot of weird people on the internet. So no stress if that's not for you or if you don't believe me. Totally get it. If that does sound good, though, feel free to head to our website or hit the link in the description, thegmatstrategy.com. Register for the webinar so you can learn a little bit more about how we do things and make sure it's a good fit. And then you can book the call from there if you want to. If you don't want to do that, or you're already 100% clear on how you should proceed, that's great. We'll do our best to help you out here in a more general setting. So now you've got your next steps, or you're at least on your way to having your next steps. So let's discuss what a good GMAT score is. Like I said earlier, this depends a bit on your GPA, your work experience, and how competitive the program is that you want to get into. In general, above 600 is a good place to be, since that's going to be the low cutoff for a lot of top 50 programs, including top 10, believe it or not. 605 and up, you will get a look at the rest of your application. Now, everything higher than that helps. It's up to you to decide how much energy you're willing to invest, though, and how much that helps your odds of getting in to the school versus investing that energy into something else that might help more, like getting recognized or promoted at work, or maybe focusing more time or energy on your projects outside of work if that's a weak point in your applications. Like if you're great on the job, you got a great GPA, but you're not really doing much in the community, and that's a place that you could stand out a little bit more, maybe that's going to help you out a little bit more than a higher GMAT score. There are those kinds of situations out there. To try to make things as super simple as possible, let's say for the vast majority of people, meeting the average GMAT or as close as you can personally get on your timeline at your target programs is a great goal. That's a great simple goal to set from the beginning. Beyond that, again, it's really up to you how much work you want to put in and how worth it is to you personally. Even though I don't believe in a quote unquote ceiling on what any of you are capable with the exam, because I've just seen crazy stuff happen so much. Like all of our potential is like we could all get an 805 if we put in enough time. Having said that, there is often a point of diminishing returns where if you kept putting in the time, your score might go up, but it might not meaningfully make a difference in your odds of being admitted. And because this is just a means to an end for the vast majority of us, virtually all of us, it just might not be worth the time. And again, it's a personal choice. If you have questions about how to navigate that, let us know. We're happy to advise. But I'm also going to recommend later that you reach out to an admissions consultant because it's nice. A lot of those companies do free calls. So, I mean, it's basically infinite ROI if you think about it. I mean, you do have to spend the time to be on the call and like give them your resume in advance and stuff, but small price to pay for free advice from an expert who's going to help shed light on the application process more broadly for you. So, yeah, I would recommend doing some web searching on admissions consulting companies and do 2 to 3 free calls just to get a few different opinions. And that should help you figure out what the strengths in your application are, what the soft spots or weaknesses are in your application are, and that should set you up with a good plan to help address those weaknesses. And that's usually the most efficient path to success. We're all going to be in different situations depending on our industry, our role, management, how a company culture. I mean, there's all kinds of things that affect recognition and promotion and title. So it's good to get some personalized advice on that. And again, there's no monetary cost. So highly recommend. That brings us to the, so that basically ties off the question of like, what's a good GMAT score? It's going to be heavily dependent on your specific situation. That's why I encourage you to reach out to those people who can look at your resume, your work experience, your target programs, your academic history in more depth and help you with that. And if GMAT turns out to be the main thing that you need and you're not sure how to move forward based on all the free advice that I've given you in those other content areas, or you would just prefer to hop on a call, I just told you how you can get help with that. So that's a good GMAT score. And that's how you figure out what that is for you personally. That brings us to a broader question of what kind of school should I go to? Now, this is getting a little bit beyond the GMAT, but it could be related to choosing your target score. So I'm just going to touch on this super, super, super briefly, even though this content and this channel is focused only on GMAT. Yeah, every once in a while, it's helpful to talk about the application process a little more broadly. So if you're really not sure or you don't have any specific programs in mind, and because you'll want to have some idea of what program you want to go to in order to pick your target GMAT score and optimize your GMAT prep, like we talked about, let's talk a little bit about how you can narrow down the scope. I highly recommend thinking about what you want to do with your career and then think about the ideal geographic location to do that. This might be a bit of a dark horse piece of advice. I haven't seen a lot of admissions consultants talk about this or heard. But in general, most of us broadly don't consider location to the degree that it influences our opportunities and connections. I think we lightly consider location or maybe even heavily consider it. But whether we like it or not, even in this broadly distributed digital age, the physical location where you go to school, where you work, and where you live does have a massive, massive impact on opportunities, connections, people you meet, and in some ways, sometimes the way you think about your career. So I recommend you give that at least some thought that's commensurate with how big of an impact it's going to have. It doesn't mean it's the be all end all, but I think of the things that people think about, that is the thing that is not thought about or considered enough, in my personal opinion. Now, it's not the only thing to consider, maybe obviously. You'll also want to consider what academic or professional areas schools specialize in. So that's another major second factor. And then I would just make your decision based on those two factors to begin, location and specialization. That should get you a few good options if you're really not sure what kind of school you should be going to right now. Now, if you have already gotten clarity on where you want to go, there's no need to reconsider this based on what I just told you. This is just advice for people who aren't sure yet. And that's why I'm bringing it up, because that is related to the GMAT in the sense that it's going to be difficult to establish your target school score for the GMAT unless you know what the score is that is going to be acceptable at your programs. Now, quick tip, if you can afford to visit the schools, that is a fantastic next step and definitely recommended, since that'll usually help you make your decisions. But it's not critical, especially at this stage of the process. And as long as you're fairly certain that an MBA is going to help you reach your goals, and you have a reasonable list of schools you believe will help you get where you want to go and that you'd be happy to attend, that's more than enough for establishing your GMAT targets, which is the important step at this point in the process. So Now that you got your score targets and you know which type of school you want to go to, hopefully at least a few schools that seem good, let's discuss a bit more about what's covered and how to do well on the test. So the content of the exam is actually fairly straightforward. It's math through high school level geometry. It's basic reading and logic, and then basic data interpretation. That is pretty much it as far as content goes. Now, the content is really important. If you don't remember your exponent rules or how to do long division, you'll want to relearn that stuff for sure. But it's not the whole story like it is with a lot of other tests. On a lot of other tests, just knowing the material is enough and then you perform well. This test is different. You'll notice that the quant section is actually called quantitative reasoning, and the verbal section is called verbal reasoning. It's not called quant knowledge. Let's define reasoning as your ability to comprehend problems from different angles. It's kind of a simplified definition, but I think it'll help us. That means that there are going to be tricks, traps, complexity when things seem simple, simplicity when things seem complex. And that's part of what the exam is trying to gauge, is how good of a decision maker you are and how good of a problem solver you are. Even in these kind of like weird situations, it's your ability to see things from different angles. I'll call that reasoning for a moment. Now, obviously, this is a super broad generalization, but if you're a great problem solver and a great decision maker, you'll probably be a really great business person. So that's what the test is designed to measure at the heart of it. Now, we can also make the argument that it filters for other positive traits like determination or intelligence or something like that, but that's speculation. That's not necessarily what the test is designed to measure at all. And it's even debatable whether it actually measures those things, like any of the things I just mentioned. But that's a conversation we're not really here to have right now. The point that I'd like you to take away is that you should learn the content, but also expect that there's going to be more to mastering the exam than simply knowing the material. I think that's really, really important, especially if you're just starting out, because that catches some people off guard and it can be quite discouraging when you're like, man, I feel like I know all the material, but my score's just not there. Please don't be discouraged, or let's be honest, being discouraged is natural in that situation. So don't stress about being discouraged. It's totally natural. That's the way it goes for almost everyone. Certainly there's people who just study for 2 weeks and get an incredible score, and that's amazing and like totally cool. That's not the majority of us, and it definitely wasn't me, just for the record. But if you do get discouraged, knowing that it is pretty common helps, I think. And just remember that the only way to guarantee failure is to stop. So as long as you don't stop, there are odds that you will succeed. And I've done my best. All of us behind the scenes have done our best here to fit all the pieces in for you so that you can make the fastest progress possible. But if it was possible to do it overnight, I mean, I would definitely recommend that way. But this is the next best thing that I've found. If you discover the limitless pill, so to speak, definitely send me an early adopter press kit. In the meantime, we'll keep going. So again, just find a way to persevere if this is important enough for you, even if you learn all the material and still feel like, wait, why is my score not there yet? That's very, very common. Speaking of success with this exam, success with the exam usually comes from three things. Number one, creating a sustainable routine. If you're not sure how to do that, please listen to the balance and consistency episodes that I mentioned earlier that are linked below. Balance and consistency. If you're not sure how to create a sustainable study routine, that'll get you through the next weeks or months. That's the first pillar of success. The second pillar of success with the GMAT is having a solid plan. If you're not sure how to do that, again, the how to start and how to structure your study time episodes are going to be the places to go, and you will be crystal clear, hopefully, by the end of those. But if you're not, like I said, just head to the website and we got you covered. Last pillar of success with the GMAT is using a data feedback loop. If you're not sure how to do that, please listen to the episode titled, Can I Reach My GMAT Goal Score? Can I reach my GMAT goal score? That'll also be linked below. Now, just in case you don't want to go off and listen to all those episodes, because that is a few hours of work, here's a quick primer. How do I establish a good study routine? If you want the quick start guide, write a list of your priorities and goals, put them in order of importance, and then fill in your calendar each week according to that list. That's like the quick start guide. Okay, you can just pause this episode, write a quick list of your priorities and goals, put them in order of importance, fill in your calendar for next week according to that list. If you do that, that's going to be a decent routine. Again, if you want a lot more detail on how to do this, then we've actually got a lot of episodes about how to manage your time well, because it's so important. Just to rattle off a few, that'll be linked below. How to study full-time. If you've got full-time bandwidth at any point, like on weekends, or if you're going to take a leave of absence for work. The balance episode will help with that. And then if you're hungry for that next level, I just finished a series on how to study smarter, harder, and longer. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. So if you're feeling like this is already a little much, then that wouldn't be my first recommendation. But if you're excited, like, yeah, I'm hungry for that, then that's what I recommend. And I truly hope you enjoy it. Okay, so that's how you set up a sustainable routine. How do I make a study plan? The quick start guide is take a baseline test, establish your targets based on your goal scores for the schools you want to go to. I just talked to you about that. And then figure out your financial budget so you can make a good decision of all the programs that I list out in the How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2025 episode. Okay, so that's the quick start for how to make a plan. Now, real quick, we haven't talked about budget yet. So how do you establish a budget? Let's keep this real simple. I'm talking about financial budget, not time budget here. Look at what you make now financially and look at what you would make later based on the MBA average exit salaries. You should be able to find that information online and decide what that's worth to you. In fact, this is a great opportunity to use some generative AI tools. Most transformer-based models, like a ChatGPT, for example, can make a financial model for you if you want one. You can use standard assumptions or your own data. It's totally up to you. Side note, if you are not comfortable with AI or you feel like you don't like get how to use it, quote unquote, the prompt I used was super simple. I just said, please create a financial model showing the average lifetime earnings of a typical MBA applicant with an MBA versus without one. That was it. That was the whole prompt. So you can use some version of that, and you should get some decent data that then you can chat with the AI about to refine. If you do plug your own stats in, and you're okay with that, depending on the data privacy of whatever situation the model uses, and this is not legal or financial advice of any kind, you can get an even more accurate picture if you want to pop those details in there. But obviously, that's personal and it's totally up to you. Obviously, also, there's more than money that's involved in this decision, but we are talking about financial budget, so it makes sense to consider finances there. So that's how you establish a budget if you're not sure. And I've found that those generative AI tools with the financial modeling is kind of cool. Obviously, if you have great financial modeling skills, you can do that yourself probably a lot better than an AI can. But for those of you without modeling skills or you just want a quick snapshot, I've had a lot of success with that. Okay, so then you're going down the path. You've got the right plan. You know the rules of the game. You know what's tested. You've got a provider picked out, or you've got a good free program of study, all this stuff that I've been talking to you about. How do you get support if you need it? If you need free support, then I would highly recommend a free generative AI tool like a ChatGPT or an Anthropic or whatever you're into. I recommend a simple prompt like please support me through my GMAT preparation and just go from there in the chat. But if you have some good prompting skills or you use Gen AI on a regular basis, you've probably got some really cool stuff you can do with that I don't even know about. So definitely let me know if you have some suggestions. I'm wide open with how to use that tech better. If you have a paid subscription or you've paid for services from a provider, then definitely tap into that for support. Maybe that's obvious, but that's why they're there and you deserve it. So please don't be shy about reaching out to your providers. That's why they're there. They want to help you. And you can also listen to an episode that I made, I think last year, called How to Support Someone Studying for the GMAT. And you can use those techniques to support yourself if you need help with the emotional side of things. Okay. So that's how you can get some support. Let me know if you have questions on that. Okay, more nuts and bolts. How do I actually take the exam? Like I said, it's available in person and online. I'm just going to do a super quick start rundown of the in-person and online process, like what it looks like to take the test. And then if you want more detail, I have a whole episode breaking down every step in extreme detail called GMAT Focus Test Day, GMAT Focus Test Day, and that'll be linked below as well. So the in-person steps, you'll sign up online, you'll pick a test center, you'll go to the test center, you'll show your ID, they'll scan your palm veins into the computer. It's kind of crazy. You'll put your stuff in your locker, you'll scan your palm veins again and receive a board and marker when you enter the testing room, and then you'll begin the exam. That's it. That's how it works going in person. You'll see the score right away at the end of the test, and you will receive an official score report via email a few days after your official test. Those scores that pop up on test day are called unofficial scores, but it's extremely rare that those deviate from the official score, like 99.9999999% chance the scores are going to be the same. Once you receive that official score report via email a few days after your exam, then you will have 48 hours to send those to up to 5 schools. That's the policy as of today. That can change, so feel free to do a web search if you want to check if that's still up to date. But let's say the next 6 months, you're probably safe. Now, you can pay more to send to more than 5 schools or to send the scores later than 48 hours. But within that 48-hour window, up to 5 schools, it's included with the price of your exam. So I would recommend sending the scores if you're happy with them. If you're not happy with them, you don't have to send them, and the schools will never see them if you don't send them. And you can send individual scores, by the way. So if you don't like your exam score, there's no need to quote unquote cancel it. That's not possible anymore. Instead, you just send the scores that you want the schools to see. So the online steps, very, very similar. But you will want to read the policies on your room compliance because you're going to be taking it at your home or office. And there are some strict guidelines around what's allowed and what's not allowed in terms of like windows and what you can have on your desk. And those are constantly evolving. So I would just search online exam policies, MBA.com, and that should get you what you need. Now, basically, just the quick start version of this, you don't want to have anything on your desk besides water if you want it, and the computer that you're taking the exam on. That's it. You're going to want to avoid external monitors. You're going to want to avoid dual monitors. You're going to want to avoid other accessories on the desk. If you have any study materials on the desk, your score can be canceled immediately without refund. You can be banned from taking the GMAT. We don't want that. So definitely web search those policies and make sure your room is in compliance before the exam. If you practice with those on your practice test, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but on test day, you're going to be really glad that you did your practice test in that official room environment. So look up those policies before your practice test as well if you plan to take the exam online. Now, if you want more detail, again, the episode is called GMAT Focus Test Day, should be linked below. But that's the basic rundown of how you take the test on test day. So how do I receive the scores? Again, you'll see your individual and total scores right away at the end of the test. So quant, verbal, DI, and then the overall 3-digit score at the very end. And then you'll receive an email, usually a few days later, with the official score. And that's how you get your scores. How do I send the scores? Again, once you've received the email, you'll be able to log in and select the schools that you want to send your scores to in your MBA.com portal. And then you have up to 5 schools included with the exam registration fee. There's a small fee for sending to more schools. I don't know exactly what that fee is because it does change from time to time. So quick web search should net you that information. Yeah, at that point, if you've done everything right, you'll probably be done with the GMAT. Now, many people have to retake. The process of retaking is basically just doing everything that I talked you through in terms of how to optimize your time. It's just that your new baseline is the score you got on the previous GMAT, and you'll work from there with basically the same process. So how do you apply? That would be the next natural step in the process. I'm going to give some super broad strokes here because this is mostly just related to the GMAT, but this is stuff that I wish somebody told me. So that I didn't have to spend hours researching this online just to get a rough idea of what the whole overall application looks like. So the basic timeline is you want to get your GMAT score at least a few months ahead of the round 1 deadline in an ideal situation. So again, that's like September-ish. So let's talk about getting GMAT wrapped up summertime-ish, like June-ish. That's ideal. It's not always possible, but you want to do your best to make that happen, okay? So let's recognize conditions are rarely perfect. Just commit to doing the best you can with the resources you have available. If you're right up against the deadline or it's like July already right now, just do the best that you can and reach out to us if you need some help with an accelerated timeline. I recommend scheduling a free consult with a few admissions professionals like I talked about earlier, just to get the kind of sense of what type of score you're aiming for vis-a-vis the other aspects of your application, and whether you should work on anything in your profile in parallel with GMAT studies. So for example, if you talk to 3 consultants and all 3 of them say like, hey, you're not really doing much outside of work, you need to show like you got some hobbies or you got some volunteer work or like something like that, then you're probably going to want to start that more than just a couple months before the deadline to demonstrate that it's something that you're actually putting something into, if that makes sense. So sometimes that's realistic. Sometimes it's not. Like I said, if it's already October, then you're going to have to do the best that you can with the time that you have. But if it's February or March when you're hearing this and you've got some bandwidth, then it's really, really good to be ahead of that game. And you might want to start that stuff at the same time that you're studying for the GMAT, okay? Again, this is just a piece of advice to help you get the best use of your time at the beginning. And again, it's free to talk to a lot of these admissions consultant companies. The next step is usually to touch base with your desired recommenders at least 2 months ahead of the deadlines. Okay, so once you've kind of got your overall study plan, you're going to be grinding on GMAT and doing anything else in parallel with that that's needed, if anything, up until about 2 to 3 months ahead of the deadlines. At that point, that's when you're going to want to reach out to your recommenders and make sure they actually have time to write the recommendation letter for you, because it is a big favor they're doing for you. And that'll also give you time to get somebody else if your top choices are too busy. There's a whole strategy around that admissions consultants can help you with. Just want to give you the broad strokes here, okay? Then you'll want to spend some time researching each school so that you can write informed essays and also make good decisions when you hopefully get many admissions offers. So again, that's going to start maybe 2, 3 months ahead of the deadlines. You're going to be doing school research. That can also happen longer in advance if you plan to like visit schools and things like that. Or if you're already done with your GMAT 6 months in advance, that's amazing. A lot of people aren't in that situation, but if you are, that's fantastic. Great job. And you'll want to do that research so that the essays you write are like well informed, if that makes sense. And then also you'll want to have done that research when ultimately you get the admissions offers so that you know what your top choices are. So the overall timeline is just take a cold baseline GMAT if you haven't already, pick a course of GMAT study if you haven't already, speak with some admissions pros if you haven't already, go all in on the GMAT if possible, get the best score you can with the time you have, contact your recommenders, do your school research, write your essays, and then submit the application. That's the kind of the basic rundown. So again, perhaps obviously that's a super general overview, and a professional consultant can help you craft a more detailed and personal plan, but this will at least give you an idea of the big picture steps of the process and approximate timing goals. So now that you understand how the GMAT works and how to do well on it, let's talk about a couple alternatives to the GMAT that you might hear about as you're going through this process. So first of all, what's the executive assessment? The executive assessment is a shorter version of the GMAT that some MBA programs accept, but it's actually designed for what are called executive MBA programs. If you don't know what exec MBA programs are, they're usually tailored for people who are a little bit further in their career and a little bit older. So like the average age at most exec programs is 38, whereas the average age at most 2-year typical MBA programs is in the 20s. Usually these exec programs are part-time that are company sponsored. So like if you have an executive position, you're going to continue to work, do school nights and weekends, and then that's part of like your company's investment in you. And yeah, I don't know if I need to touch on the details of that. If you're in that kind of situation, you probably know what the deal is. Most of you won't be in that situation anyway, but you might. And if so, the EA is a great option. Now, if your regular 2-year non-executive MBA programs accept the EA, the full-time programs that you're interested in, it can be worth considering, but it is a bit of a technical discussion. So if you want a more detailed breakdown of how you choose between EA and GMAT, then check out our episode titled GMAT Focus or GRE or EA in 2024, and I'll walk you through how to make that decision well in about 30 minutes. Now, you're also welcome to take practice tests of all 3 exams and make the decision there, but that's going to be a lot more time intensive. So in my effort to save all of you time and make this decision as pain-free and fast as possible for you, that episode's there for you if you want. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of how to make that decision because it's just going to kind of bloat the episode, and I've already gone through it on that episode. So if you've listened to that or you're a longtime listener of the program, then let's move on. So what's the GRE? The GRE is an alternative to the GMAT that business schools started accepting somewhat recently. It's like within the last decade. It's definitely a personal choice which exam you take, and both work as far as the admissions side of things go, but different people will usually have slightly different results and experiences and potentially different timelines with each exam. That is also a bit of a technical decision based on your existing skill set, strengths, weaknesses, and your learning style, actually. So if you want to know which test is right, then again, I'll break everything down in detail in that episode, but you can also do the practice exam thing if you're really curious to get the like real experience of what the differences are like between the exams. I'm not going to make a super quick gloss over here because it's too important of a decision. So I highly recommend you listen to that episode and or take actual practice exams, because anything else is speculation, and there's just a little bit too much riding on this for all of you, in my opinion, to just like make an uninformed call, if that makes sense. So highly recommend you check that out if you're unsure. If you're already all in on GMAT for whatever reason, then great, you're in the right place. So what else is there to know about how the GMAT works? There's really just one major point that I want to round this out with. It's really worth discussing that the exam is scored completely differently from traditional exams. Pretty much every test that you've taken up until this point in your life is based on accuracy and only accuracy. But the GMAT uses other metrics other than just accuracy to generate your score. And that's usually a really big adjustment for people. You're used to missing 3 questions and getting a lower score than if you missed 2 questions. And that just seems so fundamental to test taking for people that it really throws them for a loop when on the GMAT, sometimes the opposite can happen. So how does that work? There's a lot of complexity to the process, but the easiest way that I've found to understand it is that the exam adapts to your ability in real time and gives you harder questions when you give correct responses and easier questions when you give incorrect responses. That's kind of like the first part of understanding this. The second part of understanding it is that what happens at the end of each section is the test has calculated what's called your ability level by giving you harder and easier questions as you progress through the section, and that ends up being your score. So you can think about your score in any section as the difficulty level of the final question you see. That's a majorly different way of assessing your abilities and your score as a student than a purely accuracy-based exam is. So that requires usually a fresh approach. And this is one of the major reasons that I make this content for all of you, because I did not know that when I started studying, and I burned 6 months of my life basically making negative progress. My score went down twice, if you can believe that. And that felt really, really, really bad. And I'm leaving out a lot of unpleasant words in that description right now. So that's the best way to think about the scoring algorithm without going into the super nitty-gritty details. It is in some ways oversimplifying things a bit, but it will work for the purposes of this lesson, and it'll help you build a strategy that's not based solely on accuracy, which is really important. Now, if you want more detail about how the scoring algorithm works, including visuals, I recommend our free video on our website. It's called How to Reach Your Dream GMAT Score in Half the Normal Time. I made it because it's really tough to explain the scoring algorithm in detail via audio only. But it is there if you want it. If not, that's fine. What I just mentioned should be a good enough foundation to build on. Couple more quick things to keep in mind about that, though, is that it is a brand new set of rules. And because the difficulty rating of questions matters, missing easier questions hurts your score more than missing hards. And I think that most people's study when they're self-studying is optimized to focus mostly on hard questions and not at all on easy questions. And you will want to have some easy level questions mixed in because it requires a pretty intense creation of habits to not miss those questions. For most of us, some of you will just be transcendentally great with no practice, and that's amazing. But it is acceptable. It is also worth noting that it's acceptable and expected to some degree that you're going to miss some of the questions in each section, and that can be very difficult for the perfectionists of us out there. In fact, it's possible to get a perfect score without getting every question right in the section. For most of us, that's a huge adjustment, and it's totally okay if it takes some time to get used to that like difficulty rating of questions being important. We're usually not used to dealing with that as test takers. Now, a couple points that are worth making. Just because you can miss some questions and still get a perfect score does not mean you should try to get questions wrong. That's always a bad idea, to try to get questions wrong. Never do that. It just means that you might want to recalibrate your expectations. And sometimes if you can't let go of being right on every question, that can cause damage to your score because you may run out of time at the end of the section. I mentioned this earlier, but you must hit confirm on the final question of the exam before the clock runs out, or it will be marked as blank, and there will be a massive penalty for leaving it blank in the score. Because again, your score is based on where you end in the difficulty spectrum, and it's much better to just have the wrong answer bubbled there, even if it's a random guess, than it is to leave it blank. So please always keep a close eye on the clock in the final few questions of each section, and make sure you have at least a few moments to click confirm on your final answer so you don't get the blank penalty. Right? So if we think about perfectionism a little bit, if you're so hyper-focused on getting everything right at the beginning and then you run out of time at the end, that perfectionism can work against you, if that makes sense. And instead, sometimes the best decision is just accept that you don't know how to do the problem that you're on right now and guess and move on. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, okay? Now, if you're having trouble with speed in general, then I highly recommend one of our episodes called How to Get Fast at GMAT Focus Questions. And that'll be linked below as well. Now, if you have extra time at the end of the section, you're in the opposite position of what I was just talking about, you can go back and edit up to 3 responses. This is important because unlike other exams, you cannot move freely around in the section during your first pass through the section. You can't be like, oh, I messed up on 5, and when I'm on number 10, just like go back to 5. I have to finish the whole section before I can go back to 5. And that has to do with the adaptive nature of the exam. So if you want to guess and come back to a question, or go back and change your answer to a question from earlier in the section, you'll need to finish out the whole section first and then return and edit at the end. A little bit of an adjustment, but if you prepare for it, you'll get used to it, and it should be no big deal by the time test day rolls around. My best advice regarding that feature, because I do get asked about, like, is there a strategy behind that, is to just let go of questions that are not going well on your first pass. Focus on getting the questions that you can get right, and doing a good job on that. Don't speed through easy questions to make more time for the hard questions. That's counterproductive, because like I said, missing easy questions hurts more. But if you skip something on your first pass, you can just mark it. There's a little tick box above the question before you confirm your answer, and then that'll be highlighted for you at the end of the section, and it'll make it easier to return to those questions that you might have marked. Basically, the strategy that I found works best is just a strong first pass through the section without any anticipation of wanting or needing to go back. That's what I've seen create the best results for people, rather than having like a complex strategy around skipping number 2 and coming back or something like that. That's what I've seen. And even with that being said, like, some of you will have time at the end, and it is nice to know which questions you should go back to because they're marked. So I highly recommend marking them, even though I wouldn't plan to go back on any test unless you constantly have extra time at the end of a section. And in that case, you'll want to have some kind of data on how going back changes your score. And if you've taken enough practice tests, you should have that feedback loop. So summing all this up, that is pretty much everything that you need to know about how the GMAT works. I just talked through the basics of the scoring algorithm, how it's different from other exams. There's plenty more to know about that. But as I said, I recommend our video on our website for that if you want more depth. If you just want the quick start, no frills guide to how the scoring algorithm works, that's what I just gave you. If you have questions about anything that I've gone over here, or really questions about anything related to GMAT, or if you want more personal advice, like I said, feel free to check out the webinar and book a call. And if you'd like to work with us, you can also book a call. Let us know you're interested in our program specifically, and we'll explore whether we are a great fit to work together. We're only interested in working with you if it's a good fit for both of us. We're not trying to convince anybody to work with us. It's not how we do business. And if we're not a good fit for whatever reason, we'll set you up with something better, okay? We get great feedback on those strategy calls. As always, my greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies, for optimizing your performance on the GMAT, please head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, which is linked in the description of this content. And like I said, please check out that video on how to reach your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. It'll save you a ton of time. In the meantime, this is a regular show, so please subscribe, and please stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. Talk to you all soon.